Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Weekly Sip. Today I've got some hazelnut coffee. I've realized I have a number of really large video projects, not like the 10-minute or less ones that I've been doing recently, but a number of really long projects that are about half done and that I have to get going on, like, Kick Vic or the Bolsonaro video. So this time around, I'm going to zip through the Weekly Sip as quick as I can. It'll be a smaller one, so I can get back to work on those projects. I want to get them out sometime this week, hopefully. Let's begin with this article on The Star. The Star is a Canadian paper. It's Canada's duty to repatriate the brides of Daesh. Daesh is ISIS, by the way. Now, those of you who watched my video called The Brides of ISIS, this article came out literally hours later after I put that video out. And I kind of wish I had waited on it because, holy shit, this is a ridiculous article. Jihadi brides and caliphate cubs, with the men dead, imprisoned, or on the lam. Their wives and children are coming home to roost. No, they're not. No, they're not. Idiotic girls, teenagers mostly, who pack themselves off to Syria and northern Iraq, slipping away from families, willingly giving up passports, sometimes taking up arms, often gleefully pumping out propaganda against the nations of their birth, urging others to join them. Breeding, because that, it turned out, was their primary value to ISIS. To populate the nascent state as housewives and mothers, broodmares for the next generation of Islamist zealots. Yeah, that's why they can't come back. They did all of those terrible things. But there's nothing left of the caliphate except for an ideology. Well, the ideology is the most important part, isn't it? The ideology is what will allow the caliphate to someday reappear. It's not something that's insignificant, as you seem to say here. It's in fact the most important part. It's why the fighting can't stop. At least 3 of those women, identified by name in media reports, are Canadians, as would be their offspring, regardless of the father's nationality. I'm not sure if that's the case under Canadian law. It might be. I know that Canada definitely has birthright citizenship, so it's definitely possible that those kids are Canadian. They are subsisting, those woe-begone dregs of the caliphate, in tents, without heat, with little food and scarce medical supplies. The children are dying by the week. Many others didn't survive the exodus. They're not to blame. When they say they're not to blame, if they're referring to the children, that's actually true. The kids are not to blame. They're not to blame for the actions of their parents. However, if they mean the women aren't to blame, yes, they are. The women aren't children. I know they like to pair women and children a lot together, but the women aren't children. They are adults. They have fully developed brains. They make their own choices, and they have to deal with the consequences of their actions. Yet Ottawa has no plan to repatriate these innocent victims, hasn't even offered counselor services to their mothers. Well, you know what? It sucks. But 1, the women aren't innocent victims. 2, even if the children are innocent victims, their mothers aren't. And if we're keeping the kids with the mothers, then the kids have to stay with the mothers, which is not in Canada. Like, look at this. Here's that woman that I mentioned in the previous video, Kimberly Gwen Pullman. She says, "I don't have the words for how much regret I have," and that she was thrown in jail and raped when she tried to flee ISIS. Yet the brutal crimes of ISIS, beheading journalists, mass rape of Yazidi minority women, were well documented by the time Pullman crossed the border into the Islamic State. She was already the mother of 3 grown children, not a naive ISIS fangirl. I'm not interested in bloodshed, and I don't know what to believe. These are videos on YouTube. What's real? What's not real? You're an idiot. Like, that's it. It's true. You're not a naive ISIS fangirl. You're not some teenager who makes a big mistake, destroys their life, and goes across the border. You're 46 and you did this. You're an idiot. And that's it. There's nothing else to say about it. Abdul Karim Omar, de facto foreign minister in the Kurdish-held north, said he and the Syrian Democratic Forces have more than done their part. Over to you, Western nations. Noting that at least 6 British jihadis are being held in prison, including 2 members of the notorious Beatles gang accused of beheading Western hostages. Omar warned that the imprisoned men were likely to escape or be set free in the anticipated combat to come. So his logic is that Western nations should take these people back, because if they don't, the area, as he says, is not stable politically or militarily, and during the fighting, those people will be set free, and they'll run off into the wild, and then they may end up re-radicalizing or something. And that's certainly possible. If Canada takes anybody, it should take them to put them in jail, and put them in jail for the rest of their lives. And he's right here. If there's war and attacks, those fighters and their wives will come back to Britain and be terrorists. That's true. That's what they'll do. We basically have two choices here, and the choices suck. We can allow them back in, and then immediately throw them in prison. Or we can ignore them, and then they'll come back as sleeper cells. And that's it. Of course, there's the third option, which is completely ridiculous, which is just allow them back in to just resettle in Canada. And it's like, okay, yeah, just come back in. You didn't do anything wrong. It's fine. You're just a citizen. Like, that would be disastrous. The article goes over a lot of the stuff that I brought up in my previous video. But let's check out the ending here. Apart from the firmly unrepentant, it's what they all claim, the ISIS camp followers who now want to come home. But their misadventure is behind them, some of them readily acknowledging they should be tried and sent to prison, although it's unclear for what offenses. Perhaps material support to a terrorist organization. Perhaps treason. You know, I'm not somebody who likes to throw around the charge of treason lately, because it sounds like a ridiculous charge in the modern age, doesn't it? There should be no compulsion for blind loyalty to your home country, especially in the face of your home country being somehow corrupt or committing some kind of terrible immoral acts. You don't have to be loyal to a place just because you were born there. And the charge of treason implies that you do. However, this is about as black and white of a case as we could probably get, at least in the modern world. Western countries, for all of their faults, are still the best places to live for a reason. And if you actually want to qualify ISIS as an official country, it was probably the worst country on the planet during the years that it existed. Professing their ignorance, these women portray themselves as no more responsible for their poor judgment than the children they've borne. Yeah, that's because they recognize that that bundle in their arms is actually innocent, and they want to latch themselves to it and try to come back. As repugnant as they may be, they can't be left to rot in war and refugee camps. Certainly their children are victims deserving of deliverance, and children shouldn't be separated from their mothers. No. In this case, children should be separated from their mothers. There are many cases where a mother does not deserve to have her children. Many cases. We do this all the time as a society. We find unfit mothers and unfit fathers, and we take their kids from them. And if we are allowing these jihadi children back into Canada, and I think we should, their mothers can't come with them. And that's that. They can't come. If they come to Canada, they go to prison. That's how it has to be. However, I'm sure there's at least a few SJWs out there who would say that I'm being too logical and not emotional enough. So let's cover that article now. The magical thinking of guys who love logic. Why so many men online love to use logic, in scare quotes, to win an argument, and then disappear before they can find out they're wrong. The thing about logic, it's not necessarily infallible. Like, logic can change just the way that science can change, right? You discover new facts and then your opinion changes. Like, that makes sense. But at the very least, if you're being logical, I think it's safe to say that you're using some kind of tool set in a pursuit of an objective truth, which is certainly something that you can't say for people who use emotion as their guidepost. Ian Danskin, who makes videos under the moniker Innuendo Studios, has made a name for himself on the internet for his YouTube series on the techniques and beliefs of the alt-right. His most recent video, The Card Says Moops, is worth watching in full, but there was one particular line in it that struck me. Danskin points out that even when their beliefs skew towards the bizarre and conspiratorial, people on the online right often identify as rationalists. Well, first of all, I mean, there's a few problems here. One, logic and reason aren't the same thing. They're actually opposing values, believe it or not. Logic is meant to be significantly more objective than reason. Reasoning is often subjective, and it's meant to be subjective. It's meant to be like your own personal logic, in a sense. Logic is about tangible proof, while reasoning is the capacity to make sense of stimulus. They're not the same thing. And bringing up the term rationalists invokes the art of reasoning more than it does logic. This will be unsurprising to those who often engage with the wider online right, whether it is with someone who identifies as alt-right, libertarian, conservative, as a fan of the intellectual dark web, or even moderate or centrist. So, okay, so hear me out here. Is this how the left is identifying this now, the far left? The online right is somebody who's alt-right, libertarian, conservative, in the intellectual dark web, moderate, or centrist. That's the right now. Is everything that's not left. People talk about the Overton window. People talk about how like centrist figures like Sargon or even Dankula seems a little bit centrist. They're getting labeled as alt-right or far-right or right adjacent or whatever the fuck. I've been labeled as alt-right, even though I'm definitely a center-lefty. There's been this conspiracy that the far left views anything that is not the far left as the right. And I guess this paragraph confirms it. Although their beliefs may not be identical, there are common, distinct patterns in the way they speak or type that one can't help but notice. So it's not even about the substance of their arguments, it's about how they present themselves. That's what makes you alt-right now. You can believe the exact same thing that somebody on the far left believes, but if you don't march in lockstep with them, you're part of the right. Specifically, these guys, and they are usually guys, love using terms like logic. They will tell you over and over how they love to use logic, and how the people they follow online also use logic. They are also massive fans of declaring that they have facts, that their analysis is unbiased, that they use reason and logic and not emotions to make decisions. Well, is that the case? I mean, there are definitely people out there who say, I'm using logic, and they're obviously not using logic, or I'm reasonable, and they're obviously not being reasonable. Like, that happens. It happens everywhere. But these people that you're talking about, are they actually logical? Do they actually have the facts? I mean, doesn't that matter more than how they're coming across to you personally? These words are usually used interchangeably and without regard to their proper usage, squished together in a vague Play-Doh ball of smug superiority, to be thrown wherever possible at their emotional and irrational enemies. Feminists, Marxists, liberals, SJWs, and definitely the feminist, Marxist, liberal SJW. Well, let's be honest here. A liberal can't be a Marxist, and a Marxist can't be a liberal. In fact, liberals and Marxists hate each other. You could call these men's ways of viewing the world in simple me smart, you dumb dichotomies Manchian or even Derridian, if you really want to upset them by referencing a philosopher that they've heard is very bad. Well, I've actually read Derrida. I've had the unfortunate time of reading Derrida, and he is really bad. But you can definitely, be a rational feminist. You can definitely be a rational Marxist or a rational SJW or obviously a rational liberal. That's why I said earlier that reasoning is subjective. Because smart people, if they start from a really shitty starting point, they can reason themselves into all sorts of terrible situations. There are honestly a lot of smart feminists and smart SJWs out there who actually believe that what they think is the objective truth because they started from a poisoned well. A good illustration of this phenomenon is an increasingly disturbing trend. Women whose once promising romantic relationships implode after their boyfriends become red-pilled. For the benefit of the blissfully uninitiated, to be red-pilled means to internalize a set of misogynistic far-right beliefs popular with certain corners of the internet, the product of a noxious blend of junk science, conspiracy theory, and a pathological fear of social progress. Maybe. I've seen MGTOW communities, and honestly, they can get pretty shitty sometime. I've seen red pill communities. They get pretty shitty pretty fucking fast. But honestly, there is still, little bits of value to be gleaned by sifting through all of their bullshit. And in my opinion, there's not much of it, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. However, I know what this author is really talking about. Because, you scroll back up here, and they mention all of these things, the wider online right, alt-right, libertarian, conservative, intellectual dark web, moderate, centrist, okay? What this person is doing is talking about what it means to be red-pilled, and talking about these misogynistic far-right beliefs, and then saying that all of these groups here, even the moderates and centrists, believe in this. This is how they're taking a fringe of people and then painting everyone that doesn't agree with them with the brush of that fringe's ideology. And that's just not how it works. For example, a lot of centrists, moderates, and even basic bitch conservatives don't have a pathological fear of social progress. Rather, they simply disagree with you on the definition of social progress. In regards to those little nuggets, those little bits of truth that exist within the MGTOW community or the Red Pill community, amongst all of the other bullshit that those idiots spew out. In regards to those little bits of true fact, actual fact, I can definitely see their women folk, as this article puts it, simply disagreeing with those facts, or even becoming offended that the guy's talking about them. Because this article is really implying that the women in these situations were all just completely infallible. And that's just not the case in any serious relationship. There's give and take on both sides. And ideally, that give and take should be 50-50, but there are going to be times when one partner is just objectively right, the other partner is just objectively wrong, and you have to work through that. And yeah, every once in a while, every once in a blue moon, that objective correctness might come from a community that you don't personally like. Sorry, but you may have to deal with that. For men, especially insecure and socially dislocated men, the idea of rationality can be kind of a comfort blanket. I've heard this logic used before. I think both the author of this article and I can agree that socially dislocated or emotionally insecure men are probably unjustly suffer sometimes, and they're probably prejudiced against sometimes. And making fun of them for having a comfort blanket is a bit ridiculous, especially because another oppressed group, like, say, women or some kind of racial minority, those subcultures also have their comfort blankets. And when you make fun of those subcultures' comfort blankets, it is a grave social sin, isn't it? Raised from birth with the stereotype that they are more analytically intelligent, in contrast to women who are emotionally intelligent. I wasn't raised with that stereotype. And nonetheless, I do think that the data probably partially shows that. And with pop culture that venerates logical characters, and then she talks about Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock, it's no wonder that many young men see logic as a sort of personality trait to achieve. Well, that's not why they do it. Spock being popular in the original Star Trek is not why young men want to be logical. In fact, there are hundreds of more popular and more contemporary characters in pop culture that men want to emulate. And their primary value isn't logic. It might be strength, it might be stoicism, it might be honor or duty. Sometimes it's definitely things like logic or rationality or intelligence. But these are all almost universally positive ideals. It's not unreasonable for men to want to emulate them. And you know what? It's not unreasonable for women to want to do it either. And then this person argues that being logical automatically imbues all one's opinions with correctness. No, it doesn't. In fact, there are multiple episodes of the original Star Trek series where Spock's logic was wrong. And that's the point. When you apply it, and you apply it incorrectly, or sometimes you're dealing with a different situation where logic does not apply, it's not going to work out for you. Another common characteristic of these logicer-than-thou movements is a narrow focus on the type of skill that can be classified as intelligence. Affinity for things like social interaction, languages, or the arts, or at least certain types of art, often don't get a look in. Everything must be reductible to numbers, hence the typical logic lover's obsession with IQ. Well, first of all, everything's reductible to numbers because everything has to be measured. Like, if you're going to be doing any kind of scientific analysis, you have to measure it. You have to have a way to see that very clearly one quantity is bigger or smaller than another quantity. If you can't do that, then you can't analyze anything. And the typical logic lover has an obsession with IQ because IQ is probably the single most rock-solid bit of psychological research done in basically since psychology was invented. IQ is a huge variable regarding lifetime success. And these things that this person is mentioning, like affinity for things like the social interaction, languages, the arts, etc., that's not measured by IQ. That's a different kind of measurement, If you know anything about even... Like, I took first-year psychology when I was in university, and I did learn about the Big Five, which are, the Big Five personality traits. And things like social interaction, languages, and the arts, they have their own measurements within the Big Five. And one of the Big Five, conscientiousness, is which basically means work ethic, honestly, when you really boil it down. Conscientiousness, along with IQ, you put those two together, you have something like, 80% of a person's likelihood to succeed at anything in their lives. So no, it really seems like the person who's writing this article, one, is coming at it from a point of ignorance, and two, in their ignorance, doesn't know what they're talking about. Repeat after me. Calling something logic doesn't make it so. That's true. Calling someone rational doesn't make it so. That's also true. Opinions from YouTube men are not facts. True enough. Just like opinions from YouTube women aren't facts. Getting mad about philosophers you haven't read isn't reason. How about getting mad about philosophers you have read? Because I have read a lot of social justice bullshit in my time. Insulting your girlfriend because she questions your sudden political shift isn't logic. No, absolutely not. However, I do talk to my girlfriend regularly about politics. And sometimes we do disagree on things. And even at the end of the conversation, if we disagree, I think we're both able to at least articulate our points. If it turns into insults, you've done something wrong, both of you. Maybe you shouldn't be together. For a group of people who claim to hate the supposed redefinition of words when it comes to gender and race, it's not supposed. It's not. I watched the Sargon versus Destiny debate last night, where it was Destiny trying to say that trans women were real women and should be included in the definition of women. When, in actuality, I think that, like, very clearly from a biological sense, trans women aren't women. Like, anyone who's arguing that is an idiot. However, if you meet a trans woman, you should probably socially treat them like one, because it'd be polite. And even then, that politeness shouldn't be government enforced. You should always have the option of being an asshole and then being socially ostracized for being an asshole. But yeah, it's not a supposed redefinition. They're doing that shit. They're trying to do that shit. For a group of people who are very mad about the postmodern tendency to say nothing means anything, or at least this is an aspect of postmodernism they seem to have gleaned from their favorite subreddits. I gleaned it from my Derrida writings. I read them, man. I read them way back in the day when I went to university. I remember how bullshit it was then, and I still think it's bullshit now. Nothing means anything, and everything is a power struggle. That's the two most important parts of postmodernism. The new young reactionaries are remarkably devil-may-care about certain words when they seem to lend credibility and strength to their opinions. Maybe some of the idiots online aren't, but that does not quantify the moderates, the centrists, the basic bitch conservatives, most people who are center-right, the intellectual dark web. None of those people are part of what you're talking about. And yet you are slandering them like they are part of what you're talking about. And that is what this whole article is. That is what the magical thinking of guys who love logic is. Here's a video I was sent. It's from BBC Sesh, whatever the fuck that is. It's a video on thin privilege. Oh, God.
Thin privilege. Now, it's not a mythical creature or something made up. If you're thin, you have a certain privilege. So everyday tasks that a thinner person can take for granted. I can leave a plus-size person like myself feel full of anxiety, burden and upset and feeling as though they don't belong and don't deserve a place in here. So, public transport.
I'm going to assume that the subtitles are there solely because you can't hear over the fucking music.
But what a nightmare for plus-size people. Just think, can you sit in a seat and not be met with sighs, huffing, puffing, and someone squirming in the seat next to you, making you feel uncomfortable and knowing that they don't want you there?
Happens all the time. They call it man-spreading, in fact.
Shopping. Can you go into 99.9% of the high street and shop, try on and take an outfit away that very same day and not actually being able to go and enjoy the experience of shopping?
Well, I'm a short fat otaku, so I never go outside.
And to eat. Just think, can you pop into a bakery, pick up a donut and sit there and then enjoy it? And not
Holy shit, maybe you should be... That's a giant fucking donut. Maybe this is why you don't have thin privilege.
Not feel that you've been met with stares or comment, I cannot do that. Going to the doctors. Are you able to go and be seen and diagnose what is actually wrong with you? Or the appointment turned into a weigh-in session? And to be honest, I actually avoid going to the doctors now just because I don't feel like I'm taken seriously. Just because someone's smaller, just in the same way as someone's bigger. There's no way that you could diagnose someone's health just by looking at them.
You know, that's only partially true. You can look at a thin person and say, you know, that person might be healthy or they might not be healthy because you can't tell other problems that might be arising that have symptoms that aren't related to their size. However, you look at a fat person and say that person's not healthy. You can just know that because they have a problem and that problem is directly related to their large size. You cannot be fat and be healthy. It doesn't happen. You can definitely be thin and be unhealthy, but you can't be fat and healthy. It's impossible.
You wouldn't go up to a thin person or comment on pictures listing off all the health problems that they may or may not have. Yet again, another privilege. So,
Hey, everyone gets shit on the internet. That's just how it is.
I can put a picture up on Instagram and I'm listed with everything that's wrong with me. Of course, none of it is true because nothing's wrong with me. Before you roll your eyes at the idea of thin privilege, just try putting yourself in someone else's shoes and just looking at it from their point of view, how it could affect them or how it could make them feel. I'm not having to go at thin people at all, but just simply acknowledging there is the privilege that society has unfortunately put on people who are thinner, just to combat it. Just acknowledge it, be accepting of anybody of any size, and don't fall into what society and the media are trying to tell us that are right or wrong. There are bigger people in the world, there are smaller people in the world, celebrating everybody's differences, everybody being kind to one another regardless of your size.
Yeah, if you want thin privilege, you can go out and get it. You know, you can go out and earn it. It might be hard. No one's going to say it's easy. You can do it. Like, this whole... First of all, privilege is kind of a strange theory in itself because it's not quite the way that SJWs say it is. However, even within that idea, thin privilege and fat oppression is completely different from something like racial privilege, you know? Unless you're going to go and do a Michael Jackson sort of situation, if you're black, you can't become white. And unless for some reason you're going to be a Rachel Dolezal or a Talcum X, if you're white, you can't become black. It's something that you're born with. It's something that you will have for the rest of your life. And now we can discuss whether that should be adequately called privilege and oppression. We can discuss what the effects of it are. But no one can argue that you are born with your race. You are born with your physical sex. There are certain immutable characteristics about you. Being thin and fat is not one of those immutable characteristics. And I know a lot of SJWs like to say that privilege can never be earned, it can only be granted by society. And if that's the case, then thin privilege doesn't exist because you can earn it. You can take a fat person, they can go work out at the gym for a year and stay on a diet, and they will look fucking amazing. 1 year can do it. 6 months can do it if you really stick to it. I mean, that's the reason why I'm so fat after like 7 years of attempts. So no, even by their own definition, thin privilege isn't a thing, and fat oppression also isn't a thing. Let's end off with something goofy here on comicbook.com. Pokemon Sword and Shield introduces the perfect starter for Pokemon for millennials. Now, the 8th generation of Pokemon games, Sword and Shield, was released on Nintendo Direct a couple days ago. I've always been a pretty big Pokemon fan back from when I was a kid, so I'm pretty hyped about it. Apparently the game this time is set in the UK, so there's been a lot of meme images going around of the main characters in the game acting like rowdy Scottish people, which is pretty fucking hilarious. But this article has to do with one of the 3 starter Pokemon in the game this time around, the water-type Sobble. While all 3 new starter Pokemon were well received, it seems that the millennial generation that grew up with Pokemon has adopted Sobble as its new mascot. Sobble is a water-type Pokemon that is described as a somewhat timid water lizard Pokemon that shoots out attacks as it hides itself in the water. Many Pokemon fans, especially those who grapple with anxiety or are introverts, instantly related to this precious water-type Pokemon. Judging from Sobble's shocked and wary looks, we imagine the Pokemon probably works 60 hours a week to pay for its overwhelming student debt and rising rent rates. As a water-type Pokemon, Sobble is also probably perpetually concerned about climate change and other problems that it will have to deal with that were caused by the previous generations of Pokemon. Sobble is tired of being blamed for the deaths of things like country clubs, terrible chain restaurants, and styrofoam, none of which are really worth the money needed to prop up the trappings of the baby boomer generations of Pokemon. Plus, since Galar is an analog to the British Isles, Sobble is also probably stunned about the self-destructive Gale exit movement that seems determined to cripple the country and make its life even more miserable. The world's problems probably weigh heavily on Sobble, and it probably resents Scorebunny for posting travel pictures on Instagram, and Grookey for acting like it's still in college and showing up to work hungover on a Wednesday after a long night at the pub with its rugby mates. It wishes it could enjoy itself like other starter Pokemon, but it neither has the time, money, nor energy to overcome the existential dread that keeps it up at night. It's a fucking Pokemon. Look at these fucking soft boys. Sobble is the manifestation of my millennial anxiety. Sobble really hit the millennial zennial anxiety zeitgeist, and the results are good. Sobble sounds like you're sobbing while trying to cobble a life together, and that's why he's the perfect representation of millennial dread and anxiety. He's just as worried about his future as all of us. Come here, sad little tadpole. I choose you. Sobble has severe anxiety and had to drop out of college, but still has a ton of student loans and worries people will judge him for it. So quite literally, this article was written by these tweets, it sounds like. They just took other people's tweets and formed them into an article. Anyway, this is fucking stupid. And it only serves to re-cement my belief that millennials are a softened generation of people. Anyway, I'm done here, guys. As it turns out, even though I wanted this to be a shorter one, it was still quite long. So here we are. I'll see you guys on Twitch tonight, twitch.tv/GameBoomers. I'm going to be playing Tales of Vesperia, the new HD re-release of the game. I hope to see you there. Drop by, say hi. Have a good day, my friends. I love you.